This is our Civil Rights Project by Taylor Allen and Pat Ormison. First is racism, and it doesn't really have a date, because, yeah. And it was discrimination against a race of people or religion.
It's a red light.
This is a red light because racism stopped progress in the civil rights movement.
Next are the Jim Crow laws, which were active from 1876 to 1965. This is a stop sign because
The Jim Crow laws stopped progress in the civil rights movement.
Massey versus Ferguson is next, and it was in 1896, and it established separate but equal facilities. This is a yield sign because
It was a start, but it never really got anything done.
Next is the Brown versus Board of Education, which was in 1954, and it overturned the Plessy versus Ferguson case, declaring separate schools unconstitutional. This is a green light because
It stopped segregation in schools, and this was a start.
this was the Rosa Parks situation, which was in December 4th, 1955, and she refused to give up her seat on the bus to a white man and was arrested, led to the Montgomery bus boycott. This is a green light because
It started the move to jumpstart the civil rights movement, and it led to the Montgomery bus boycott.
the SCLC, which stands for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was January 10th, 1957, and it is an African-American civil rights organization founded by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This is an on-ramp because
It started protests, and protests were a vital part of the civil rights movement.
next is the Little Rock Crisis in 1957, because the Little Rock Nine were a group of African-American students enrolled in Little Rock Central High School in 1957, and they were chased by hordes of angry students and parents. This is a speed bump because
It showed how difficult it was to desegregate schools.
This is the Malcolm X, which was in 1959. He was an African-American Muslim minister and a human rights activist. And to his admirers, he was a courageous advocate for the rights of blacks. This is an increase in speed.
It helped the civil rights movement because of his moving speeches.
Next is the sit-in movement, which was in 1960, and it was an act of nonviolent protest where demonstrators that sat in on stores and institutions until the policy changed. This is also an increase in speed because
It was a vital form of protest and helped progress the civil rights movement.
Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also the SNCC, which was from 1960 to 1966, and it sponsored fundraisers for underpaid workers and participated in freedom rides and sit-ins. It's a school zone because
Students sponsored the events.
these were the Freedom Riders, which was in 1961, and they were civil rights activists who rode interstate buses into the segregation southern United States in 1961 to protest segregated public transit. It's a green light because
It helped progress the civil rights movement because it was a major and vital protest method.
Martin Luther King Jr., which was in 1963, and he was an American clergyman, activist, and leader in the African-American civil rights movement. He is best known for his role in the advancement of civil rights using nonviolent disobedience. Next was someone directing traffic because he was like the director or leader of his movement. Next was the violence in Birmingham, which was in 1963, and it was a protest organized by Martin Luther King Jr., and it turned deadly when police and civic authorities became irritated. Eventually, it led to policy change in Birmingham. Everyone being sprayed because during this they used to spray protesters with hoses.
We want equal rights!
Get back! Get back!
I Have a Dream speech is a public speech by American activist Martin Luther King Jr., and it was delivered by King on June 28, 1963, in which he called for an end to racism in the United States. The speech was given to supporters on a march on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, was enacted July 2nd, 1964, and is a landmark piece of civil rights legislation in the United States that outlawed major forms of discrimination. Green light as well because
It stopped major forms of discrimination.
two Montgomery marches, also known as Bloody Sunday, which was in 1965, and the two marches that followed were marches and protests held in 1965 that marked the political and emotional peak of American civil rights movement. This is like a top of a hill because
It was the emotional peak of the civil rights movement.
Power, which was in 1966, is a political slogan and a name for various associated ideologies aimed at achieving self-determination for people of African/Black descent. This is like directing traffic because it was directing the African Americans to take control of their own political future. Black Panthers, which was in 1966, was a black revolutionary socialist organization active in the United States from 1966 until 1982. Pedestrian Crossing, because the African American movement for political party and stops so they can have the right of way to make a difference. The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was in 1968, and he was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee on April 4th, 1968, at the age of 39. It was a major blow to the civil rights movement. This is like someone dying because the leader of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr., died.